All right, today we're going to talk about Reconstruction, and we're going to do some two parts, and I'm calling this part A New Hope. And I'm making a super, super cheesy Star Wars analogy with this reference here. And so if you have seen Star Wars and you know what I'm talking about, hopefully this helps us understand some things. And if you haven't seen Star Wars, hopefully you've heard at least enough to understand that in Star Wars, there are two big opposing forces. And that is really the kind of point of this analogy. And it's just like a little bit of what hopefully we're going to talk about. Really, what I want you guys to think about is this quote here. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme, though, and it's allegedly said by Mark Twain. I did a little bit of research, and nobody actually knows if he really said this or wrote this anywhere, but it's allegedly, so maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. It's not that big of a deal, but I really like this quote. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. My first learning target is pretty straightforward and keeping in line with that idea of eras and characterizing them. So we want to understand and be able to characterize this period of Reconstruction with the developments and patterns of human actions. And my second learning target has to do with the quote, okay? Identify how developments during Reconstruction, so the things that we're going to talk about, how does this rhyme with some of the stuff that happens in other places in history, either before or maybe after, and maybe currently? All right, so let's jump into my two forces here, okay? When we talk about Reconstruction, Reconstruction is this period right after the Civil War. So between 1865 and 1877, the American government is trying to reintegrate its formerly rebellious Confederate states. And its other really big task is integrating 4 million formerly enslaved people. I'm going to use this word freedmen because that is kind of the term that was used at the time. So newly freed slaves, they were called freedmen. And so the 4 million formerly enslaved people are now the freedmen. All right. So, and the Reconstruction time period, it is characterized by these two forces. All right. And the first force is this pro-Black integration U.S. government, which is passing progressive laws. So, pro-Black U.S. government laws. And that is one force here that I'm representing. And then the other force is this anti-Black group of Southerners that is undermining this progress. All right. And this is the kind of big thing that I want you to think about is these two forces fighting each other. When I talk about history, I don't usually like to always just like make things black and white, like good and bad, light and dark. But in this particular case, when we're talking about Reconstruction, it feels appropriate, okay? So, so there's definitely like the light side and there's a dark side. Okay, the other part that you need to understand is this word undermine, all right? And this is important. So if you don't know what this word is, you should write this down, okay? Undermine means to lessen the effectiveness or power of some rule, law, or authority. You don't need to write these down, but I just have them here in text. And then I'm just going to explain some of these. So things to help you understand undermine. When a parent goes and asks their mom for like, hey, can I like go to my friend's house? And mom says, no, you are not allowed because you need to do this thing. And then the kid says, okay, well, fine, I'm going to go ask dad. And then you go ask your dad and you're like, hey, dad, can I go to my friend's house? Please, 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 please. And then dad's like, okay, fine, I guess you can go. What you have just done is you have undermined the authority and the power and respect of your parents. Another way that undermining might happen is if a student defies a teacher's instructions in front of the class and then the teacher doesn't do anything and he gets away with it, this can undermine their authority and power because other students are going to say, hey, Jimmy got away with, I don't know, saying something naughty. And then other students are going to say, well, hey, I can do that too. And so what that is doing is undermining the effectiveness and the power of the teacher. And then another way too is that when somebody takes advantage of or justifies getting away with something because of some kind of technicality or a loophole, that undermines kind of the intent of a rule. And this is kind of the one that we're going to focus on today. And these two we will see examples of as we move forward. All right, when we talk about Reconstruction and this pattern of undermining progress of our two forces, I want you to think of it as on a timeline. There's like some things that happens where there is like something that the light side is trying to do, the progressive government is trying to pass these laws, and there's the undermining dark side trying to resist and diminish the power of those laws. All right, so the first thing that happens in 1865, yay, the Civil War is over. Woo, let's have a party. We ban slavery, no more slavery. Everybody's happy. Great news. And I call this hope and optimism rise because everybody kind of has this sentiment of like, hopefully feeling good and feeling better. And when I say everybody, I mean mostly people in the North, all right? Everybody has this idea of like, okay, now things will get better. So we banned slavery, except as a form of punishment, and that becomes relevant here very soon. Another thing that happens after Civil War is the Freedmen's Bureau gets established, okay? And I know the color here is not great, but the important parts is what I got in yellow. And the Freedmen's Bureau, it's just a social work agency, and they basically just help the freedmen, okay? And they do certain things like help them find jobs, help them make sure they have homes, make sure they have supplies if they need clothes, they need medicine, whatever. The other thing they do is they build a lot of schools, and a lot of the schools they would turn into formerly or historically black colleges. And then the other part that they try to do at the beginning is they start this land redistribution process. So one of General Sherman's things was he wanted to like take all of this land from plantation owners and from former Confederate states and slave owners and redistribute it to the freedmen. And so they start this process of confiscating land and redistributing it, but that gets shut down real quick, and then they have to give it all back. So that doesn't really go anywhere. The big thing they do is they start these schools. And so here's just a picture of a freedman school. So, we just got like a one-room little house here, and you got a couple kids in school. But it's a big deal because before 1865, there's no like officially like slave or black schools at all. So it's kind of a big deal. So yay, no more slavery. Everyone's free, except then here comes the undermining, okay? So the southern states between 1865 and 1877, I put this arrow here because it definitely kind of continues. They pass these black codes, and it's in kind of direct response to the 13th Amendment. Slaves or the Confederate states are like, okay, fine, slavery's over. Well, we're going to make their life miserable still, and they still can't be citizens. We're going to be super discriminatory, and they can only have certain jobs. This part is particular to certain states. Different states had different variations of these laws, but they all had some type of vagrancy law. And vagrancy means you're homeless or jobless. So if you don't have a job or you don't have a home, you are now breaking the law. And if you were homeless or jobless, you could get arrested and then end up having to do forced labor. So I'm actually going to show you some more pictures of these in our next lesson. But this idea of forced labor as a form of punishment from like people being arrested for silly things like not having a job. This actually becomes more of a common practice kind of after Reconstruction, like 1870s, 80s, and 90s. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so I want to look at some other specific black code laws. You don't have to write these down. I just thought I'd show you some of them. So this specifically here, I'm just going to read in yellow. In St. Landry, no Negro shall be allowed to pass within the limits without special permit. What is St. Landry, you may ask? St. Landry Parish, it's a county in Louisiana. A whole county in Louisiana said if you are black, you need a permission slip. And who do you get your permission slip from? Well, according to these other laws, every Negro is required to be in regular service of some white person. So yeah, there was a law that says first you need a job, and your job must be employed by another white person. And if you want to go into at least certain places, you better have permission. And if you don't, you could get arrested or worse. Here's another one too. No Negro shall be permitted to preach to congregations of colored people. So if you're black, don't talk to other black people. Really great. So no more slavery, but you better follow these laws because they were still laws and like legal. So that is your first example of like trying to pass a progressive law and undermining force. So then the federal government answers back with the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment specifically grants citizenship. So it said, fine, you have to be like allow citizenship and you need to stop these black codes. It's supposed to override black codes, and it was supposed to kind of give them more power to vote. And that didn't exactly happen. So another thing that they do in 1868 is the military occupation of the southern states. And they're supposed to do a couple things. They send in military forces to the southern states, and they're supposed to help register black voters and enforce the 14th Amendment. So stop discriminating, stop the whole black code thing. And they had to reform the governments to approve the 14th Amendment. I put this word intimidate in parentheses. I didn't read that anywhere, but that's kind of definitely the feeling I got is like the federal government sent the military into the southern states to like keep the peace, and you better stop being as racist and be more inclusive. So here's just a sketch image that might have shown up in some cartoons or something about or kind of representing an American soldier trying to like keep the peace between a black mob and a white mob. And then this map here shows the military occupation zones. They're broken into 5 different zones. And each state, you can see a date here. It says rejoin the Union, 1868, 1868. Some of them are rejoining in 1870. And that means that it took them that much longer to like be inclusive enough and including enough black voters and approve approving the 14th Amendment, and that's how they had to get back into the Union. So they pass the 14th Amendment. They say, okay, fine, you can be citizens and we'll be less discriminatory, I guess, if we have to. But we're going to find a big fat loophole in the 14th Amendment here. So check out what the 14th Amendment actually says, all right? In the pink here, you don't need to write this down. Also, there's a lot there. Anyway, all persons born in the United States are citizens. Yay! But then check this out. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge, that kind of means restrict, and the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So it says like, no, if they're citizens, you have to treat them like everybody else, okay? And so then the southern states thinking about how can we undermine the situation? So just think about it for a second. Can we think of who are citizens but don't vote? Who can't vote that are citizens? Women. Women cannot vote and they are still citizens. So then the southern states said, hey, there's a whole group of citizens that can't vote. So just because the former slaves, the freedmen, they're citizens, doesn't mean we have to let them vote. And so they would still sort of enforce these voting restrictions, then they would try to not let them vote. And so I just really like this meme of this like woman like thinking a lot, because this is totally like the feeling that I get when I hear some of these things and you're just like, what? How? Just yeah, you get a lot of feelings, I think, when you learn some of those. So there's a second round of undermining the laws and things that go on. So then they come back again with the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment explicitly grants the rights of citizens of the United States to vote, and it shall not be denied or abridged, which means restricted, by the United States or any other state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So they're like, here you go, Southerners. You might have gotten me twice with your whole undermining like slipperiness, but now you better let Black people vote. And so this is just another kind of sketch image that would have shown up in a newspaper, and we have just some representation of Black representation in democracy, because now Black people are able to vote a little bit more explicitly. They've still got the military protection, still trying to enforce these things. And so now, finally, I call this section Hope Realized. So it was rising in 1865, yay, but then there was this pattern of undermining going on, and now it's only in 1870 that finally some of these things are realized. And so by 1870, half of Mississippi are freedmen. So half the population of Mississippi are Black. In South Carolina, more than half of them. With Mississippi, again, 90% of Black men in Mississippi are registered to vote, okay? Now, this is just one example, but all across the South now, between 1868 and 1877, with the 14th and 15th Amendment together, there are over 2,000 Black men that get elected to different levels of public office. Some of them are local and state, like city or county or whatever. But some of them end up all the way in the United States Congress. And so there's 2 U.S. senators and 2 congressmen, and we even get a governor in there too. So one of the first Black senators is this guy, Hiram Revels, that guy right there. And he is from Mississippi. So again, that state, there's a whole bunch of Black people there. So they're naturally electing a lot more Black people to government. And this guy, check this guy's name out, Pinckney Pinchback. All right, Pinckney Pinchback. What name that? And he is the first American Black governor of Louisiana in 1871. But check this fun fact out. Second Black governor of the United States, 1989. Only just a short, what is that? 120 years between our first and second Black American governors? What? Yeah, all right. So it really is a big deal, though, because like a lot of things, they made this progress within this few year time. But they strike back. When I say they, I mean the undermining anti-Black Southerners. And so that is what we'll talk about in our next lesson when we talk about part 2, Reconstruction. They strike back. I don't know, come up with the title. Anyway, also to think about this, how is history rhyming? What did you just hear or learn that sounds similar to things that happened maybe currently?